I'm going to start by playing this video. I'm just going to be dropping stuff on this window. And this is a video I found recently on Twitter, completely by accident. And Andy Matuszek, the guy who posted the video, explained what it was. I'm just going to read the tweet, basically. He said, playing with a strange pen, the ink stretches backwards into the past and forwards into possible futures. The two sides make a strange loop. The future ink influences how I draw, altering the future's past ink. Normally, when we draw things, anything, your memory or your sight, if it's something that's right in front of you, play an important role. And we kind of like to think that we're more or less in control of what we draw. Of course, it depends on everyone's skill, and not everybody is as skilled at drawing, but we more or less have control over what we draw. Here, however, it's a very different business, because the software is doing strange things to your decision-making. Because the software behind the actual pen, the pen is just an interface, really, is this neural network that's trained on a data set of thousands of images, very simple images, probably. But these human-drawn images allow the software to represent many different classes of different objects, like, for instance, a hand, or a tree, or a car. So the software kind of, as you start drawing, identifies what you're trying to draw, and then it suggests paths, which is a pretty cool experiment, I guess. But what I found really cool about this little experiment is especially the way the people behind this were phrasing it. Because this, how he was talking about it, how this future ink, past ink, all of this evokes a weird temporality, where the notions of future, present, and past kind of become a bit twisted. But then I thought, well, hold on, because representing time has always been a really twisted thing, a really hard business, really. I found some interesting examples. I can just stop it, because, oh, it doesn't want it? Yeah. Yeah, I found some interesting examples. Augustine of Hippo, many years ago, proposed that the present is analogous to a knife edge placed exactly between the perceived past and the imaginary future. And then, many years ahead, in relativity theory, the conceptual observer is at a geometric point in both space and time, at the apex of this really weird structure that physicists call the light cone, which is basically the convergence of these two abstract imaginary light cones. And where both meet, the one going upwards is the future, the one going downwards is the past. So they both meet at this abstract point, really small thing, and that's the present. And these two views, separated by 16 centuries, no less, have in common this notion of a radically small point to represent the present, this thing that Thomas Pynchon called the temporal bandwidth. But they also have in common the use of metaphors which involve planes to represent past and future, which I found really interesting. So, yeah, past and future converging on this single point, which may be just like an abstract point, or this edge of a knife that Augustine of Hippo was referring to. And of course, this edge, or this point, whatever, this buffer area is more or less large, depending on your notion of how long the present is. And there's lots of literature on the topic, of course. But this crease line where the two halves meet is the present. And a very good way, I don't have a piece of paper here, oddly enough, but a very good way to make a model of this is to get a piece of paper and fold it in half. So you have the two parts, the two halves of the piece of paper. One would be past, the other future. And the crease line, the fold line, is your present. So that's kind of a valid model for this idea of representing time. Very similar to this light cone, and also very similar to this edge of a knife with the two sides converging on the edge. And the temporality that this pen, this strange pen that I was showing you at the beginning, suggests also makes it easy to adopt that model of converging planes. Because as you draw something, the software, you're in the now, you're in the present, you're drawing this thing, but the software is pushing you with ideas, is giving you clues of what you should be drawing, perhaps. And so you're in the present, and you're precisely at this crease line, at this fold line, but then your drawing actions is what separate this past, what you already draw, and this future that the pen is suggesting. So you and whatever you're using to draw this strange pen is kind of the present again, which is a bit mental as a model of how events occur. You know, talking about folds to represent time, perhaps. But then the folding time metaphor kind of makes sense in relation to how we refer to events in general. In English, it's very common to say that things unfold, so that things develop and they become known and understood and so on. So the fold is not such a weird way to talk about things happening in time. And we use folds not just to talk about events in time. We use them to talk about cooking, genetics, and satellite design. And I found so many examples while doing research on this. Economy, of course, and game theory. There's a lot of folding in chemistry, which I will talk about later. So folds, sometimes very direct and sometimes in a rather metaphorical way, are a very powerful physical device in life. And so that's why they show up so often in the way we speak about things. And we fold things, mostly surfaces, for a number of reasons. We fold them to modify their structure, to divide them into parts, to alter their volume. So if you have something that's flat and you fold it in half, perhaps it's not flat anymore. It has another dimension. To make them more rigid, if you think of cardboard, how cardboard is structured inside, again, by folding, corrugating the cardboard, you make this thing, you give it rigidity in a very interesting way, which we give for granted. But so yeah, manipulating information is also a very useful thing to do with folding. Again, I don't have a paper, but if I had this imaginary paper right here, and there's something written in it, but I fold it in half, you cannot read it. So that right there, just manipulated information with just folding a piece of paper. That's so there's so many applications, so many disciplines, so many fields around us that use folds as a very powerful physical device. I'm not even gonna go into origami because that's just porn. It's just too much. So a fold is one of the simplest gestures, really, that we can come up with to manipulate information, manipulate structures, volume, size, all of that. So my point in general in all of this is that the fact that folds are such a useful and powerful physical device make them also a very valid metaphorical device as well. I'm going to show you a very diverse collection of examples in which folds and folding play a crucial role. And most of all, I'm interested in many things, as you will see, but I'm interested in this notion of folds and folding as a gesture of deformation, because in general, I'm interested in how things deform, mostly in music and graphics, but I guess you can extend it to other fields. So deformation of surfaces, of objects, but also things that we cannot usually deform. So yeah, in essence, I'm interested in the fold as a deformation of reality. It sounds really grandiose, but that's what it is. There's a short story by this writer that I sort of like called Will Armcheck. I'm not sure that I'm pronouncing his name right because he's such a strange name. But so it's a short story about the end of the world. It's called How It All Ends. And it depicts this end of the world not as a time or a place, but I can show it to you. Oh yeah, that's pretty big. Okay. So it says, it's a four-dimensional surface, curved and chaotic, which courts the path of the planet on its journey through space-time. Were one to visualize it using only 3 dimensions, it would seem almost ribbon-like, a black helix of fluttering death. It's really poetic and really nice. But then it keeps going, I skipped some bits. For the most part, it keeps its distance. The moon has been swaddled in its fold many times. So basically, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's this end of the world. It's this kind of entity, this thing that's curved and 4-dimensional, so we don't really see it and understand it and perceive it because we're restricted to 3 dimensions, not counting time. And then, rather than just sucking the planet into some sort of catastrophe, what he describes is that this entity collides with the planet from time to time, and that's when catastrophes happen. For instance, the moon, because it's a smaller object, collides more often with this thing, this helix of death, and that's why the moon is so wrinkled. And the story makes use of folds in a very direct way. And for instance, this mythological explanation of why the surface of the moon is wrinkled, because it has collided often with this superfolding entity or whatever it is. But again, it's this evocation of this entity that we cannot really understand because it is completely outside of our experience that interests me. So this helix that he describes is folded in really twisted ways, but it is folded in ways that we cannot understand, basically, because it's more dimensions that we can see and appreciate. So again, folding here appears as a deformation of our reality and perception. So it's a strange folding, let's say. And in a sense, the author is I would say, folding our ability to think about many things. One of them is folding. And this happens a lot in science fiction, of course. Good science fiction pushes our imagination and twists and folds our imagination constantly. And yeah, pushes our intuitions about things that are normal and common and acceptable in our day-to-day life. Sometimes, though, you don't even need science fiction to kind of go get a bit surprised about things in everyday life. I'm going to show you a picture. This is completely true. It's not an art piece. It's something I found one day. I was going on my bike, and I had to stop. I remember this feeling that, what the fuck is that? And I was so shocked, and it took me a while. Then I took a picture. I took like 30 pictures of this from different angles to show that due to some strange event, this traffic sign on the ground was bulging up and was going from 2D to 3D suddenly. I mean, it's not that it's going to, really it's not. I mean, it's always been 3D, it's just really thin, so we don't really perceive that dimension. But yeah, just this strange fold that happened then completely alters the perception of volume and depth of this thing. Have another one, oddly enough, which it's a video I took a few years ago. That's my dad's foot. And again, this is not an art piece. It's just walking around and seeing this thing and going, whoa, what's going on here? So yeah, these things in the ground bulging upwards, going from 2 to 3D, kind of in a kind of almost poetical way, but also very, very much physical way. There's this book called Topological Pathways of Post-Minimalism that is written by this guy, Eric de Bruyne. It has this beautiful section describing the moment that Dan Graham, this artist but also art critic, first saw Bruce Naumann's pliable pieces made from sheets of latex in '68. And Dan Graham, when he saw these pieces, he realized that there was something going on there that needed, kind of requested a different language to talk about these, a different vocabulary to talk about these pieces, different from the regular stuff that was commonly used for sculpture. And I'm going to show you this piece in particular, which is not so different from my Arrow in the Ground. I mean, it is different, but it's kind of the same feeling. That it's just this piece of latex that's self-supporting, arched in this strange way. And I'm not going to read there's a whole section of this where he describes the feeling of this work and the feeling that he had when he encountered this series of works. And the main thing for me is that he was really shocked about the way Bruce Naumann was manipulating space and tension in the material itself. There was nothing else but the material that was just self-supporting. So it's a comment on the materiality of the thing in itself. It's deformation. It's about tension of forces and spatial warping and all of these things, which led Dan Graham to for the first time, I think, introduce the notion of topology into art criticism, which is quite a bold move. But even beyond this decision, which is quite mind-blowing on its own, this latex piece is remarkable because it uses this fold, this deformation of the natural shape, if you want to. If it wasn't for the hand of the artist, this would have been just flat on the ground probably. So it uses this fold to call attention onto this sheet of latex, which would otherwise look as part of the floor, just the same as the traffic sign would just look normal and flat if it wasn't for this whatever happened there that made it that way. So folding is an act of self-revelation in a way. So this object, and in the case of the art piece, it's kind of different because it's intentional. The other one, the traffic sign, I find interesting because I don't know what happened there, but something happened to make it like that, and then suddenly this deformation, this fold, is an act of self-revelation. You feel compelled to push the brakes, stop your bike, leave it aside, and go like, okay, what's going on here? So and it's almost like this thing is calling you. saying, "Look at me, I'm here. I'm not just a normal arrow on the ground. I'm quite special in a way." So I'm going to play you a short video. There's a good example that I really like of this type of distortion, spatial distortion, as a self-referential gesture, and it's a good example, but very different from this stuff that I played. Well, we don't even need the music; it's just epic music. It's okay. It's from The Truman Show. It's this moment of self-revelation, which also takes place inside the narrative of the film. I'm not a huge fan of the film, but this moment is really cool. This fold that reveals the structure of a fiction inside the fiction that we are watching. If someone has not seen this film, I'm sorry, because I'm about to ruin it for you. But it's been out for ages, so it's okay. I mean, you should have seen it if you wanted. This is the story of a character that lives inside this fiction, but he's not aware of that. He's just kind of captive. He's the star of a TV show, but he just thinks it's his normal life. Until he starts suspecting some things are perhaps a bit strange, and in this radical act of rebellion, he takes a sailboat and decides to leave and keeps sailing and sailing and sailing into the horizon, quite literally into the horizon. That's what you're seeing right now, when the sailboat literally collides with the horizon, because the horizon is just painted on a wall. But he doesn't know that, of course. He's just part of this huge TV set. It's huge, but it's not infinite. So eventually he reaches the end of the TV set. So the horizon turns out to be just a wall painted with what looks like an infinite sky, but it's not, it's just a wall. So the horizontal plane, which we take for granted when we look at the ocean, for instance, suddenly folds up 90 degrees and reveals itself as this wall that tells him about the structure that he's part of, which is, of course, this huge fiction, and he completely freaks out. So, well, I mean, I'm gonna play it all, but you should see the movie if you haven't. You just be aware that that's the story. But yeah, the thing what I'm trying to show you is this really cool moment that only requires a quite simple deformation of this structure that he believes is completely flat, and it turns out to be just a 90-degree angle, just very cleverly disguised. This story is loosely inspired on Time Out of Joint by Philip K. Dick. Very loosely inspired, but kind of the same idea. I just ruined a book there again. So apart from this folding structure around the TV set in The Truman Show, the trick is, of course, to hide information from this Truman character, who is completely unaware of his surroundings and the TV show and all that. So I already mentioned folding as a way to manipulate information, but I want to show you a very cool example of that, one that I've been obsessed with for years. And this is not going to translate well at all on a screen. This kind of sucks, but it's what we have. I don't know if you're familiar with Al Jeff's fold-ins. This is a regular feature on the inside back cover of Mad Magazine since 1964. Almost every issue of Mad Magazine has been has had one of these fold-ins, matte fold-ins, he calls them. So fold-ins require this process. The reader has to fold a page so that arrow A, you see those tiny arrows down below? So arrow A has to meet arrow B. So as you fold in the thing, a new image and a new message appears in front of you. And it's always this kind of satirical comment on something that's current. And I mean, it's not so much about the message, but how you get to the message. So the fold is used to manipulate information in a very peculiar way, not just covering and uncovering, as I was showing you, I was suggesting, but recombining the elements of what you have in sort of unexpected ways. I have some more examples of this. Again, this does not translate well. I mean, the cool experience is to have the thing in front of you. There's a book that compiles a lot of them, not all of them, of course, but a lot of them. And so if you like this kind of stuff, I suggest you check the book because it's really mad. Mad. So in a book or a magazine or whatever, some sort of publication, the fold works as a hinge, as a point of support around which all the elements turn, pages, covers, all of the structural elements. So the main structure of a hinge is to unite elements and to allow them to move. And moving is an essential part of folding, of course. And the folding is movement, and it is flexible because it is mobile, the hinge, and it's also an axis of symmetry, and therefore it contains the principle of reflection, a term that's has etymological roots with fold, because this is the Latin flectere is the Latin word for fold, which also means bend, but also deviate, but also divert. So there is a connection between folding and reflecting, and reflection and therefore symmetry. This is a house, I forget where this is, but it's a pretty clever house, painted. It's right next to a lake. So the reflection of the painted walls give this image of these guys rowing a boat on the lake. So folding is connected to multiplicity. Which makes sense also because the word multiply is related to ply, which comes from pline or Old French plier, and then if you keep going, you keep going down the line, and then you find plicare in Latin, and if you keep going down the rabbit hole, you find this Indo-European plec, which is oddly enough exactly the same word for fold in my own language, Catalan. So folds and folding are implicit in multiplicity and reflection. And I'd like to show you something that also has to do with reflection, and that also has to do with this thing, which I'm sure you've seen a trillion times. It's this Rorschach test. Which you create by just dropping some ink on a paper and then folding in half, and then the reflection of the ink creates these very beautiful symmetrical patterns. But I'm not showing you this just because of that, but because as I was working on this, well, this is months and months ago, but it happened that as it happens to me sometimes when I'm working on these ideas, one day I realized that I was starting to apply these things in my own practice, and I make music basically, So I'd like to show you a very quick example of how this ended up just bleeding onto my own practice. The way I make music, or we make music, is I make music with another guy called Stephen, who lives in Scotland. We basically write very short, simple programs that spit out numbers. Basically, I mean, I'm simplifying, but that's pretty much what we do. We just create these little pattern generators that spit out numbers, and these numbers end up being, you know, frequencies or durations or whatever it is, many parameters that you can plug these numbers into. So it's about number manipulation, or, you know, if you want, creating sequences of numbers that we find interesting or pleasing, whatever. It's not a conceptual thing, it's just that we like it. So years ago, my mate Stephen started making heavy use of this method in these little programs, which basically created symmetrical streams of numbers in his sequencers that he was writing. And for a while, I made nothing of it. I mean, it's, yeah, cool. But then he used it so much that I started paying attention, and I began using it too. And soon I was going a bit crazy with it, because these algorithms that spit out a sequence that then you can mirror them, and then you can get the result, and then mirror that again, and then you grow these sequences in an interesting way. That's pretty similar to the idea on one of these inkblot tests. I can even show you, not that I'm improvising these, I mean, I knew I was going to do that, so. I'm going to play 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5, I don't know, of these little pattern generators, and you're going to see like a very simple representation of different events, which are just mapped to drum sounds right here. Right, so it's five things, right? It's just playing a sequence of these 5 things in order. Nothing too radical. And then you can wait. Right, you can mirror that, so it creates this mirror, completely simple mirror. Then things get more interesting as you do it again. But then you choose different points at where to mirror things from or to. And then it keeps growing. And yeah, I'm keeping it super simple, just so that it's easy to follow, more or less. I know it's not probably super easy, but. And as you start playing with durations, I was complaining about something. As you start playing with different durations, also, yeah, these symmetrical sequences get more and more interesting for me, and especially when you start doing it at random points in the sequence, and you end up with pretty complex sequences made from recursively folding the result in weird ways. And sometimes it's nice. I mean, this is just an example. This is not actual music that I made with this. It's just to show you something. It's pretty boring, but this is. I mean, it's also relevant because this is part of how we work. I mean, we try these things hundreds and hundreds of times, and 99% is super boring. But then 1% is that's interesting, and we keep it, and then we keep all the good ones, and that's how we end up making a record. So, yeah, I have another example of something that has to do with folding and audio. Again, this is not a piece of music that I'm showing, I'm just showing you this kind of demo of something that may be very normal if you're familiar with synthesis and signal processing and stuff like that. But if you're not, maybe you've never heard of this thing called wave folding, which is, it's quite an ingenious way to use a wave to add harmonics to the output. This is a stethoscope view of this triangle wave being folded onto itself. And this method, again, is called wave folding. It's just a very direct way. And it's this old synthesis trick to create complex harmonics from a simple input. And the trick is to fold edges of a wave inwards on itself until the wave starts compressing, creating some distortion, which can be just minor distortion or very, very full on. It depends on what you do, I guess. So again, this makes me think. Okay, it's quite a stretch, but think of that traffic sign, which I've been obsessed with for a year, because the new result comes exclusively from altering the shape of the original wave, which is just this boring triangle wave. But just because if you see on the peaks, they're not just sharp peaks, but they're folded inward on themselves. So yeah, it's a similar process to the traffic sign, just not using external elements, but only modifying the structure of the thing. I showed you this pattern generator and this also that picture of the lake to talk about symmetry and mirroring, or these inkblot tests. But our books and movies and comic books and all of that stuff are also really full of examples of reflective surfaces and hinges that it may be a wall, it may be a line, a point, a very tiny thing that connects two converging realities, or a point at which reality splits in two, if you want. So basically gateways into other dimensions and gateways into other ways of seeing the world, I guess. So often two worlds, two realities, to whatever you want to call it, collide or are side by side, and it's this surface, this vertex of the folding structure, whatever it may be, that works as a bridge between them. So yeah, the hinge bridge. And you see this in, well, I mean, I started thinking of movies and books and stuff where this happens. You see this, of course, in Alice going through the mirror. You see this in Chihiro. You see Super Mario games are just crazy, full of things, tubes that lead you to these underground worlds. In the Matrix, there's also this mirror that Neo touches, and yeah, it's just goes into strange things. There's a really good example that I really like. I'm not going to show you this because it would take a long time to demonstrate, but there's this video game called Guacamelee, which I played a few years ago. It's really over the top and naive, but it's a cool video game about this Mexican fighter who is trapped between the worlds of the dead and the living, and he has the ability to switch between these two realities. And that pretty much becomes a mechanic of the game, and it's very fun because you have to use this ability to reach places that you would not be able to reach if you would not switch between these two modes of perception or existence. So if I want to reach that structure up there, I cannot jump there because I cannot jump that high, but maybe if I switch to this other reality, there's something here which I don't see right now because it's not there for me in this mode of existence. But this guy has the ability to switch, so you have to jump there, and then mid-air you have to switch again to the other mode, and it's really mad because it becomes very, very complicated to do all these key combinations, but. Yeah, it just becomes this really intense switching between realities that's really fun and really naive at the same time. So all of these examples, all of these narratives contain this element of the hinge, the bridge, something that allows characters to jump between realities. So again, yeah, hinge is a keyword here, and Hasbro, there's this important company called Hasbro, which is known for a number of things, but Transformers is one of the most successful things that they did in the 80s. Well, they didn't start it properly, but I'm not going to go into detail of how Transformers came to be. It's this line of toys and later cartoons and comic books and stuff from the early 80s. And they came about essentially, well, one, because of the fascination of whoever was in charge in these companies with robots and, these futuristic creatures. But not just that, really. I mean, cheaper materials, cheaper production methods, and more effective hinge mechanisms that made it possible for manufacturers to mass produce these toys. Because it's not just Transformers. If you think about the toys of the 80s, I was a kid in the 80s, and I remember suddenly everything was just like, very, very full of articulations, and you can switch things and flip them in strange ways, and it was amazing. It was really fun. And it's only many, many years after that I realized, okay, well, that happened because they figured out how to make it cheap and affordable and easy. So Transformers folded back and forth between their robotic appearance and other shapes, mostly cars, but also planes and motorcycles and all sorts of military equipment, trucks, even robotic animals, which didn't make any sense, but they didn't give a fuck. So they did so by folding in more or less complicated ways and reconfiguring their parts in ingenious ways. And just like these matte foldings that I showed you before, the main purpose of this folding process in Transformers is to manipulate information, to hide, because they're too awesome, they're too amazing for everyone to see, I guess. So the iconic phrase that you can read at the bottom of this cover is "more than meets the eye." It's kind of a subtitle of the whole series, and which is also would work as a subtitle for the matte foldings. There's more than meets the eye in these illustrations, because there's a hidden meaning, there's obscured information. So 80s Transformer toys were relatively simple mechanisms, but then more than 20 years after they came out, Michael Bay, genius, Michael Bay decided to push the canon by showing us Transformers like we've never seen before. Because I don't know if you've seen the original Transformers, they was just like very stiff and very kind of, okay, maybe 6 or 7 folds in each character. But Michael Bay really went for it. I mean, it's really full on. This is just a compilation of, I don't know how many transformations, but many, because he's done quite a few films already. So yeah, it's really full on transformations, which kind of divided fans a little bit, because people like the old school Transformers. But I mean, if we are to really get into this fiction and bite the bullet about the existence of these alien life forms and synthetic intelligence and all that, I think it's understandable, or I think that their folding mechanism would be unfamiliar to us, more similar to that than just these really stiff things. For comparison, this is the first folding car that came out, or is about to come out. Recently, this video was all over the internet. This is in Japan, of course. I mean, it's not quite the same, is it? It's not as epic as Michael Bay's Transformers. It's cool. I would like one, but it's not the same. So the point in let's go back to Michael, because it's even more. So the process is in these transformations in Michael Bay's Transformers is so incredibly convoluted that you cannot really follow what's going on. I mean, visually, I mean, I've tried many times just to stop frame by frame, and it's just hundreds of parts moving at once. It's impossible. So you cannot follow it visually, which I find really brilliant, because that's how I think it would be if we ever encountered alien humanoid robots. It would be something strange. It cannot be like that Japanese car. So Michael Bay's Transformers shows this kind of super permutation, this really complex shapes. Let me stop that for a minute, because okay, that's too much. Which sort of reminds me of this piece by Olaf Metzel. He has a strange title, it doesn't matter, it's from '91. And yeah, always, I mean, since I discovered it, it kind of reminds me of Michael Bay's Transformers. And Metzel dismantles this basketball court and lays out its parts as if they were folded into each other in really strange ways. And 90 years before this piece, there was this Indian mathematician called, I need to look it up, because Tandalam Sundara Rao, I always remember Rao, but not Tandalam Sundara Rao. He published this book, Geometrical Exercises in Paper Folding, in 1901. He suggested teaching Euclidean geometry to children could be done without axioms, so without statements taken on trust. In comparison to Euclid, Rao proposes a different conception of geometry based on folding as the only allowed operation. The opening chapter in Rao's manuscript starts with a very simple exercise in which a fold on a sheet of paper is used to create a straight line, which is a really genius thing to do, really, because then if you fold the paper, you don't need to prove that that's a straight line. It's really obvious. It's right in front of you. It's a straight line, and you don't need to define it as this thing that, 2 points connected by this. No, you don't need all that. It's just you fold it, and there you go. That's a straight line. So this book, that's the first example, of course, but it keeps getting crazier and crazier. But his point is that just for folding, you can teach Euclidean geometry to kids. Then fast forward a few years into the future, and this guy, Richard Buckminster Bucky Fuller, American architect, inventor, systems theorist, designer, really kind of a strange Renaissance man. He's mostly known as the inventor of the geodesic dome, which I'm sure you've seen a trillion times. They were really popular in the mid-20th century. And he, throughout his career, he was also very critical of how Euclidean and Cartesian geometry were formalized, and he reconsidered these practical actions like folding. He was obsessed with movement. I cannot really tell you how he got to this geometric form of this geodesic dome. I've read it a few times and I always forget how he got to that, but it's about manipulating shapes and combining them in very smart ways. But the movement and folding of shapes onto other shapes is one of the crucial things for him, and it's really amazing how he claimed to be actually very influenced by Roc, the Indian mathematician that I mentioned a minute ago. So years after he introduced many of his structural designs, researchers in London found a striking resemblance between the protein shells in viruses and these geodesic domes. And it's almost a one-to-one resemblance. This is of course not a picture, it's just a 3D model of one of these viruses, or the shell of the virus, of this common virus, you call it a norovirus. And just like Metzel's basketball court, a lot of Fuller's models speak of the link between shape and use, because, I mean, of course, in that basketball court, it's not just a pretty thing. Well, it is just a pretty thing, I guess, but I mean, it also speaks about how if you lay it out in that way, you cannot really play basketball. I guess. I mean, it would be a bit hard. So there's this link between shape and use, about how the topology of things is directly related to their functionality, but also about parts and wholes. These Fuller's models are all about parts and wholes, and how parts combine into wholes, and how, you know, the sum of the parts are, you know, always. Well, it's all about how these things are interconnected. And these two things allow me to jump to something entirely different, which I mentioned at the very beginning, which is proteins. Because don't forget, this is this norovirus that we're watching right now is also related to proteins. Proteins are really interesting machines. They're really probably the smallest machines that we know out there. They are the cleaners, the builders, the information, you know, messengers, transporters, all these important tasks that take place in cells. They're carried out by a protein, and this originally there's this really long chains of molecules made of these things called amino acids. I'm not a chemist at all, but I mean, I've been reading a crazy lot of things about these protein things, and I always have a hard time relating to this, because I've never seen one directly. I mean, it's just kind of again, it's axiomatic in a way. I just believe these things because I really like these ideas. But the main thing that scientists have learned about proteins, or one of the main things, is that their shape describes their functionality, and their shape is created through a process of folding. So they start when they are born, I guess, when you could call it, or formed. There are these really long chains of amino acids that start folding onto themselves in extremely complicated ways. And then the functionality that this protein ends up having is not so much determined by the individual amino acids in the chain, but by the way that these amino acids are folded onto each other in this unique three-dimensional conformation that they call the native state, the native form. It has a number of names. So it's not the parts, it's the whole, and especially the topology of the whole, the shape and the relationships of, you know, volume and scientists are really interested in how proteins are folded up, because their function depends on their shape, as they say. So if you know how a protein is shaped, how a protein is folded, you can do things to it. You can interact with it, perhaps, to cure some sort of disease, because a lot of diseases that we have from very, very small, minor things like allergies, well, not so small. I mean, people are really affected by allergies, but then I mean on the other end of the spectrum, you have really brutal things like HIV and prion diseases, and all of these things have to do with proteins, because depending on their shape, sometimes they become aggressive towards the body. and they contaminate neighbor proteins, and they start kind of going wild, and then they produce things that end up showing up as a disease for us. So understanding and predicting protein folding can also help understand how certain folding structures can contribute, for example, to Alzheimer's disease. And so certain pharmaceutical products are specifically designed to fit in this particular structure, this three-dimensional structure of a protein that's causing trouble. So it's not just some pretty representation, even though I really find it really beautiful, but these shapes are key to understanding how to solve these problems. University of Washington a few years ago started this distributed computing project focused on disease research, and it was aimed at solving all of these problems, or many of these problems, directly related to protein folding. And this requires an immense number of computer calculations, so that they decided to start one of these distributed projects where people can download a screensaver, and the screensaver is just a little program that starts doing running these models of different foldings of a protein, because protein can shape themselves in thousands and thousands and thousands of ways. So to understand and learn more about how this happens and how this can be counteracted, they needed more info about it, and through the joint effort of all of these interconnected screensavers, they could actually gather some interesting data. But then very dedicated users that were looking at these screensavers, trying to fold these proteins in strange ways, they started contacting the university and saying, I think I can do a better job than your screensaver. I think if you give me the kind of the same tools to do these twists and turns and all of this modeling, 3D modeling, I could do it better than your program, because the program is just running, just trying, but really simple intelligence, so to speak. So then they gave it some thought, and they eventually turned it into a game, and it's called Fold It, and it exists, and it has thousands of crazy players who solve problems, and it's not just abstract game problems, but they are actually solving things that are submitted by members of scientific community. They give them a specific protein shape, and then they start folding, because that's all they do in the game, and eventually they maybe come up with some solution for something, which I find really abstract, and don't ask me about it. But one of the famous success stories that came out of this is a pretty substantial breakthrough in HIV research, which one particular researcher had been struggling with for, I think, 10 years or so. And once they submitted the puzzle to the game, it was solved in 10 days, which is really amazing, I guess. It shows the power of the crowd. So, I mean, I can keep going. I have tons and tons and tons of material related to things, because I'm fascinated by folding at many levels, as you probably have seen. And it may be related. I was thinking a lot about it, but why am I into this? So it may be related to the fact that I have extremely poor spatial memory and intuition, and in general, I think we are all attracted to things that we don't fully understand. And I've always had trouble, for instance, folding maps back into that very neat initial configuration. When someone gives you a map, and you especially like big road maps or big city maps, German maps are a nightmare. I don't know why, but they have really specific folding technique that I don't understand. which is, kind of ironic, of course, because my lack of spatial orientation prevents me from folding this thing that is supposed to help me with my orientation. So, yeah, strangely enough, just the other day I realized that I have this thing sitting a meter away from me, from my desk. And it's made by this artist from Barcelona called Irina Russell. And she made it 3 years ago. And it's just a beautiful structure, if you want. It's nice folding structures using maps. It's like a short series of, I don't know how many she made, but using maps as a source material. And this kind of sort of poetic comment on flipping between states of consciousness and activating an imaginary autopilot function that deactivates one's decision making. Which, when I realized that, I thought that was very appropriate because, there you go. I started talking about weird decision making in time with that strange pen. And finished talking about weird decision making in space through this super folded map, which is really also really close to the structure of certain satellite wing folds. It's not the same fold, but it's very close. So, yeah, as I say, I could keep going forever, but we have limited time. So, if there's some questions or some comments or some ideas, some whatever, thank you very much for your patience and
thank you.
Okay.
Does anyone from the audience have any questions? I was wondering, you showed this mad folding example earlier, and you have you put out a record yourself with the same name.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if you could talk a bit more about how folding manifests itself in your own work, your musical work.
Yeah, it doesn't that much really. It's in that case, that title came about because, it just sounded cool to us, and that's usually our first motivation with titles. But also because, it's a source of motivation to see certain things, certain often, games, and I'm talking about myself. I don't speak for Stephen, but I'm really fascinated by things that kind of push the limits of, structures, and it may not be a one-to-one translation to things that we do in music, or it does not influence them directly, but they are a source of inspiration, and I can think of matte fold-ins. I've been fascinated with this for years, but I can think of, many, movies and video games. For a while, I was really obsessed with this game, Katamari Damacy. I don't know if you know this game. It's really mental, and it's not that this game is important in my music or that it directly translates into something, but it is a kind of brain twister that is pretty much what we want to do with the music that we make. We try to make music that's kind of disorientating, I guess. So, yeah, a lot of this folding business is about kind of losing touch with reality a little bit, or questioning certain things. So in that sense, it is kind of close, but it's the only direct example that I can think of is these patterns that are based on symmetry and stuff like that, which they're showing up more and more in what we do. But it's just this behind the scenes thing. We don't tell people this. It's just it doesn't really matter that we're using these techniques to create these patterns. It's just for us, really. It's just this kind of almost inside joke when Steven started using all of these mirrors, and there's this other method called pyramid that he uses a lot. And yeah, it's just your ways of manipulating numbers in strange ways or interesting ways.
Thanks. Anyone from the audience?
No?
I was also thinking, the title of your presentation is Folding Folds, which implies this like recursive folding of a fold, which was kind of shown in this pattern generator example. Are there any kind of broader scale examples of this that you could elaborate on? This like recursive, constant folding process.
Oh, okay. Well, I said I was not going to talk about origami, but of course origami is the perfect example of that. There's also this thing. Let me come back to this. I can actually show you these things that I learned from my son. Yeah, one day I went to pick up my son at school, and they were doing these kinds of things. And for a few days, we were making this because they're really amazing and beautiful. And it's all about, well, okay, in this case, it's folding and cutting, but it's the recursive action of folding and folding and folding and cutting and cutting and cutting that once you then unfold the thing, it becomes this beautiful structure that you can then. Well, that's just a beautiful thing. It's not doesn't do anything really, but that's something that it really interests me. Just not that it's influential for me at a musical level, but yeah, things like this I find quite interesting. And of course, this relates to process-based art and process-based music, which I'm very much in touch with. I mean, what we do is essentially that. I don't like to call it that, but it's very much in the tradition of algorithmic composition and all of this. It sounds a bit scary when you describe it like that, but because it's more about making things that are between funny and disorientating and annoying. But the process of getting to that is this kind of algorithmic composition, and algorithms tend to have this recursive nature to them. It's just do something and then get the result and run the same process again on them, and which is pretty much what I was showing you with this symmetry pattern. But then, you can apply it to anything. You mentioned fractals at the very beginning. Okay, that's not about folding, but it's about recursion in a really extreme way. I was really obsessed with fractals for a long time.
Thanks.
Okay. So if you're not... okay, there's something up there.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because your research touched so many different fields. So, where was the start of this interest / obsession for you?
Okay, the start was well, I guess getting interested in the idea of topology, but having trouble relating to it because I am not a mathematician and I don't understand topology. I just understand certain metaphors that are kind of present in very basic topology. Then I found this bunch of examples drawn and written by this Russian mathematician, don't remember his name, but really old mathematician who made this collection of problems in intuitive topology, he calls them. And they're really simple things that don't involve any of the crazy mathematical formulas that are usually present in topology, because that's what topology is. It's just not just pretty shapes, it's just crazy math. But because I don't do the crazy math, I cannot do that, I could relate to that. And I started to get more and more into those little problems, very, very simple hand-drawn problems about how to deform shapes. And folding and twisting was an important part in that. And because for many years I've been interested in deformation of patterns and stuff like that. I think that was the first time when I started having more and more interest in the idea of folding as something that perhaps escaped my attention before. It's just was completely under the radar for me for a long time. I just, because it's such a simple operation, it's just folding something in half. We do it every day probably, and it's not so special. So it was, I think it was that getting interested in this idea of intuitive topology, which is really topology for dummies, because it's a very really basic level. So yeah, that's kind of how it started for me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's another one here.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna say anything, but since I'm a mathematician, I thought like now's maybe a good point. I just had some remarks. So, just first of all, in topology, folds are a thing that kind of disappear. So it doesn't matter. A straight line or a folded line is topologically the same. I can contract it to a point. It's basically the same thing as a point, topologically speaking. But geometrically, it's different. So that's a difference between geometry and topology. The other thing I thought I should remark is that some of the things you spoke about are like, I guess you know a lot of this stuff as well, but are gluings. So if you take a piece of paper and I glue one side to the other, you get a tube. Mm-hmm. And if you do that with the other side, you get a donut. And this gluing is like identifying points. I'm saying the point on the left is the same thing as the point on the right. So origami and gluing, I don't know, that's not allowed, I think, but yeah. They're very highly related. And then the other thing I thought I should give a short remark on is that in topology, the crazy mathematics is really all about loop spaces. So it's about like what is all the loops that you can form in a space. And earlier up there was this question like what's a hole? Well, topologically speaking, it's the thing that if you draw a line around it and you pull on the line, it doesn't become so small that it's a point. It's always around something. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I wish these things were more approachable for art because it's a very geometric and it's very interesting. You can get very weird spaces. Oh, and one thing you would probably like, you can compute a lot of numbers using a compass and straight edge. Mm-hmm. So you can divide numbers by 2 and you can do a bunch of stuff. And certain numbers you cannot construct. However, the cube roots you can construct using folding.
Okay.
So folding in a way is more powerful than a compass and a straight edge. I can geometrically compute the cube roots, which is impossible using just a compass and a straight edge. So
yeah. I mean that book that I mentioned goes into all of this. I mean, it doesn't stop at just one straight line. Of course, it goes into quite a lot of depth of things you can do with folding and folding operations. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good.
Thanks a lot, Roc.
Yeah, no, thank you.